Hi, everyone, and welcome to Conversations. I'm Emily, and I'll be co-hosting this panel along with Giulia. And today we're going to be talking about localization in conversational AI. So I'm really excited about this discussion because I feel like it's something people kind of know about, but don't really understand what it is. So we have an awesome panel of experts that we'll dig into it with. So let's do a round of introductions, and then we'll get started. Olivera, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Emily.
Hi.
Hi, Giulia. Hi, everybody. So great to be here. And hi to everybody online as well joining us. I'm located in Toronto, Canada. I work for T-Tech Digital as a principal consultant in conversation design. And my background is in marketing and conversational AI. I've been with several different consultancies like LivePerson, Master of Code, and Cerence. And I'm a bilingual conversation designer, actually trilingual technically, but mostly I speak French, Bosnian, and English, and I work actively in French and English and in localization.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. Okay, Zenon, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Zenon. I'm from company Born Digital. I'm one of the founders, and I'm also responsible for sales in our company. Basically, our company was based on the conversational AI, but the market is evolving very, very rapidly. So we are currently expanding, of course, to the broader area in this range. And I'm here to share our experience with more than 150 installations in more than 10 countries. So hopefully, we have some experience with localizations.
Oh, yeah. Valeria?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Valeria. I'm the global lead at Mother Tongue. I lead the business in the US, and Mother Tongue is both a localization company, but we also have Mother Tongue AI, which is data company. We are mostly providing fine tuning and supervised fine tuning service data services. We've been in the localization business for over 30 years. We are part of Omnicom, which is one of the largest marketing holdings. So we work across, a wide variety of materials, from very creative marketing-oriented copy to, the more standard localization. So, I'm very excited to be part of this panel and to discuss localization for conversational AI.
Awesome. And Anna?
Yeah, I'm also super happy to be here with everyone. It's an exciting topic. I'm Anna, conversation designer, working in the space for several years, 6 years, I guess. Currently at Rasa, a conversational AI platform. And I come with a background in linguistics and translation, and been working on many projects where we either cover several languages or we build for other audiences in other countries. And generally this topic of localization, it kind of transfers from my previous profession into the present one, and always remains very relevant because, yeah, anyway. That's super exciting to be here with everyone.
Yeah. Okay, so the first question I will ask is, what is localization for people that may not know, and how would you define it? Valeria, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, in short, the localization is the process of adapting a product or a service to the needs of a foreign market in order to ensure that the product is successful, and that users can utilize that service or that product. Usually, it involves more than a simple translation or the adaptation of text. It tends to include, the cultural, linguistic, functional aspects, if that is relevant for the product. So, examples can be the localization of an app. That would include, localizing the visual aspects, the images, the layout of the UI, and all of that. So not just the translation of the text. Same goes for different types of digital assets. For conversational AI, there's definitely aspects that need adaptation aside from the text, the structure of the conversation, the persona of the bot with all the parameters like formality, informality, the tone of voice, and how the conversation is structured in terms of turns. All of these are deeply embedded in the language and the culture of the countries and the markets that you're targeting.
Absolutely. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Maybe I will one comment which I see here in my notes. Of course, Valeria pointed out a lot of aspects. Of course, as conversational AI is basically omni-channel based now currently quite natively, then a lot of visual aspects are coming into the play. Of course, language is the basic, but also right now localization of the chatbot windows or even localization of the digital human avatars is becoming a big part of the game when we are talking about different markets. So I see that this visual part, which maybe in the past in the conversational AI was not so important, is coming now more and more into play as well. Plus, also one of the things which comes into my mind is in general, if you are and maybe Anna has a lot of experience in that with Rasa, if you are providing white label solution, of course, also give an ability for your customer to, for example, localize the product for their needs by themselves. So it's kind of like an element which some products can also include. So that were my thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, great to call out. Anyone else?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to add a couple more points. There's so much already good things like pointed out. What I wanted to add as well is just that localization is an ongoing effort because languages do change and evolve. And so with that comes with ongoing training to make sure that we're speaking in the way that and understanding the user in the way that they're actually engaging and conversing in everyday life. And then the other thing is, I think Valeria, you mentioned about technical and technology aspects, which it just reminded me of something that there was this case where they were trying to reach children in Africa who had barely any access to even mobiles. And so that how do you reach those people that don't have access to technology as much as we do every day? We take it for granted, which adds a whole other aspects to not only localization, but accessibility, and how can we reach that audience and make a difference to them?
Absolutely.
Anna, anything?
Yeah, I think like I would love to dig into many of these questions, but I'm sure we're gonna do it in a moment. But just maybe to add a few words on this transcreation that Valeria mentioned, because that's one of the aspects we need to remember, and it's very true for conversational AI, but for any digital product digital solution, digital service that you recreate in a new country, in a new market, you transcreate. It's important to have this concept in your mind that when you talk about it and you talk about transcreation, it always keeps your horizon wide and you understand how many things need to be done in order to localize this product. Because when I noticed people talking only about translation, it narrows the task for them, and they tend to sometimes oversimplify what needs to be done. But when you talk transcreation, you really understand how much effort needs to be put and how many people need to be involved. It also takes a village to localize.
Yeah, jumping off of that, I was wondering, like, what kind of team do you typically recommend to have for localization? And just like what types of people are involved with that kind of work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, like, as with all UX design, we're looking for a varied set of people and voices. to make sure we are representing across cultures, languages, and other factors. And then other than that, I think it's really important to always take into consideration that there's multiple languages also to localize. So that could add a layer, definitely adds a layer of complexity. And to your point that it takes a village, it takes many villages. And even when I look at localizing in French, being, French from France, in my case, also for French Canadian or French Quebecois, even just those 2 or 3 different localizations that do add complexity in terms of understanding different dialects across Canada. Different French Canadian could be a rural Quebecois accent versus an urban Montreal accent. Very, very different than one from France. And then there's many other French accents, like from Africa. In Africa, there's multiple French Polynesia. All over the world, there's French people, French francophones, francophiles. So it does add to the complexity, especially in terms of understanding those accents and dialects and the expressions. French Canadians or swear words are very different than French from France, for example, and also culturally different. French Canadians are more direct than French from France. So it does add different, not only linguistic, but cultural differences to be mindful of when conversing, because we wouldn't want to be too direct with someone that's less direct, and conversely the opposite. What do we think of that?
Definitely. I mean, I would definitely say, I mean, of course, anytime you have in your team a person who speaks multiple languages, is a great asset. That's definitely something in the conversational AI, which is excellent. So multilingual and cross-cultural teams is great. Of course, but once you're growing and expanding, it becomes impossible for you to have each and every language and dialect person in the team, because it's economically not possible, if I can put it that way. So from that perspective, usually what we at least deploy is that when we are going to the region where, for example, we don't have a native speaker or native cultural experience, at least in the phase of at least design or later stage of testing, to have engaged person that is local native, at least for some part-time, or from the customer side, who knows the emotion of the use case, who knows the environment, and before going live, that's almost a must to go through that process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So not always possible to have native speaker for all the languages you're delivering to the markets, but at least in the delivery part, for some certain portions, it's a must. Yeah. So language part is very important.
Valeria?
Yeah, I would. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would add, I mean, depending on the product, on the maturity of the company, but also depending on the mindset. Some companies really have that global first kind of mindset. And from the get-go, they would involve and have, people at a very high level that bring that vision and that really look at the entire world as the market. So you can have companies where you have a VP of localization, directors, and then a team of engineers, program manager, content strategists, all of that. But it depends on the type of product, on the type of service, on the budget. That's a big part. In other companies, you sometimes have just one person that covers all of that, and of course they partner with LSPs and localization vendors that can reach the entire world. I mean, most vendors have networks of linguists that are in country, and they can really give you feedback, not just about the linguistic aspect, but they can give you feedback on the legal aspect, for example, on the data management for conversational AI. That's really important. Even about the cultural aspects that relate to how people perceive interaction with technology, with devices. So all of that is something that you can really tap the network of people for feedback, and it decreases the risk when you go to market, that you already have all that wealth of knowledge. So engaging either vendors or whoever you're utilizing for localization, engaging them very early on in the process can be really, really an advantage.
We actually have a question that from Olga about a good point about simplifying the actual task. What can you suggest to educate clients about the scope of the localization projects, I guess?
Yeah, I would say that I'll go first if you don't mind. I would say just standardizing terminology, especially if there is multilingual use case, and that ensures consistency, which also builds trust with the user. And I would also say, in terms of trust, what's really important with voice AI, for example, is to make sure that voice selection in terms of talent, speech patterns, gender considerations, which vary by culture, accents, and so on, all of that builds into the trust factor, which is a really big piece in voice AI. And it's going to really come across differently. So there's going to be subtleties and nuances across cultures and languages.
Yeah, I would add. I mean, that's not always possible. Although it would be wonderful if the customers can align across the countries the terminology and the product names and stuff. But usually that's very challenging and difficult, because they're usually, even international companies are dealing with different names, brands, sometimes processes. So usually when we are entering into the client, or when we are even in the process of selection of RFP, we're always putting like, please counter in the factor of time and money, of course, when you are delivering, because it's an important element to factor into the delivery process. Yeah, so you need to have budget of man days and time in order to have the localization ready, well tested, reiterate, because usually it's not on the first time. You need to have a couple of iterations, pilot phase, where you again test with the real users, you factor in again their feedback. And as you know, the conversational AI is an iterative process, it's a live process. So you need to factor in the time and money for the localization into the project.
So,
if I can add to that, and can just not stress that point of testing, that this is so important. If we talk about the scope, that there should be a sufficient time dedicated to test, and not to reduce it to the minimum, especially if also Zenon mentioned it before, sometimes you might not have native speakers, or maybe even dedicated translator, editor, reviewer for a certain part of your product. Then it's even more important that you run tests, and ideally you still need someone in the team who will be able to do a proper linguistic analysis and evaluate the agent's performance and the localization quality, if I could say so, in the outcome. So if you maybe did not have native speakers or the local language experts in your team while creating, then at least you can involve them when you're running the tests.
Absolutely.
Yeah, on the back of that, that's actually something that in general the localization industry has struggled with. Often we are brought in at the very end of the process and there is not enough time. So that has been, they dedicate a lot of time for, the production of the English, most often the English American version. And then we are brought in with very little time to adapt, with no saying in, upstream in how actually the product or the service should have been designed in the first place. So that puts a lot of constraints, and it definitely impacts the quality.
So to follow up on this, when do you think is like the right time to start involving localization?
Definitely at the design level, ideation design, you can really tap the localization team and try to bring in that global mindset. But it can really save you time. It can decrease your risks because they can give you feedback on cultural aspects that they could become issues down the line. Market related aspects, you could, for example, run into issues for the methods of payments if you're not ready, because it's not the same across the world, right? So it depends on what is included in your service. So you could have problems with, what, for example, the conversational AI, the methods of validation. Some countries don't have the same trusting attitude towards sharing data, and you could run into issues just because they don't know how you're going to use their data, and they will just not interact anymore. So there's plenty of issues that people based in a country can give you feedback about, and you can design with that in mind.
Mhm. I love that point. I want to add also that some of the common mistakes is also using machine translation with no human oversight. And that's another thing that companies think that, to your point, is like, how do we keep things in budget? And then there's the opposite extreme where the quality is lacking at the expense of the budget. So I think it is striking a balance between human oversight with AI generated translation that can really help to get the best of both worlds, being budget friendly and being quality conscious.
Yeah.
May I
Definitely.
quickly again just support that point, because it's so sometimes striking for me to see that companies prefer to just use machine translation without any human involvement, especially maybe the last years. We have Gen AI, we have ChatGPT and other apps that can pre-translate for you. And machine translation has been with us actually for many decades, and it's always been with human involved. The human post editing of the machine translation has been always such a not always, but for the last couple of decades, it's been a thing in the translation industry that yes, there is a machine translation, and there are also this one of the type of the jobs for a translator is to do post editing. And then we're jumping 2023, 4, 5, and we talk about removing human from this process, and then removing this gold label, this proper evaluation from there, and that always struck me.
Yeah.
On
We
the other
actually.
hand, yeah.
Sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
I mean, because I think that the risks and machine translations will come to the come to the game sooner or later. But I think that, of course, even in the localization, we need to we cannot ignore the fact of the large language models and their multilingual capabilities at this moment, because of course they increased tremendously over last 2-3 years, and the quality is becoming more and more better and better, and of course it will become the part of our life, the multilingual skills of the large language models. So it's rather to see how to use it wisely and how to not fall into the trap. Always now it's easy, everything, I just put it into the chat GPT and it gives me back anything and I can serve it to the customer. Yeah. So it's definitely a lot of progress in that area, and I think we will all agree here that the quality has tremendously in the machine translation and LLM increased. But on the other hand, it's still quite a high risk not to fall into this. Oh, it's a solved problem, we can now relax and localization is done.
Exactly. And we actually have a question around that. And with LLMs being very strong in a few languages such as English, Spanish, French, etc., but also very weak in some other languages, do you have any tips or strategies to improve an LLM proficiency in a language that's not strong in?
That's a great question, Kencho. I would just say to talk to some local speakers and get some information, talk to them about what are some of the common idioms or colloquial expressions, what the cultural norms are, and so on. For example, Spanish, the cultural norm is that there's a casual and there's like a more formal version of Spanish, and you would use the more formal one. So yeah, so if I had a less common language, I would just talk to, if I can find some people in my network that speak that language. What do you guys think?
I mean, definitely. But in general, the testing of the LLM is a big thing and big topic of which we can probably have another discussion. But focusing on the point of LLMs. So first of all, I mean, how we are approaching it. Our solution in general use multiple large language models. So have the knowledge about the strengths in the particular languages, and even of course local languages, because I'm, for example, in Central Europe, so I can judge quite a lot of quality, for example, of the Slavic languages, and looking like, for example, even in Polish they have their own language, and the quality for others is, for example, sufficient. So have the ability to use different large language models is the key for me, absolute key, because then you have the ability to use different models for different purposes, and not to rely on one single model saying, oh, well, ChatGPT can get it all for me. Yeah, so that's definitely technologically something which needs to be in place. That's kind of like my view on that one.
Valeria, Anna, anything?
Yeah, I would say there's definitely, the progress we have seen with LLMs in English or some of the other major languages. It's not seen in many other languages. So the progress has really not been global in that sense. It's a matter of investment, of course, and budgets, but there are definitely under-resourced languages there where they have little data to begin with, or poor quality data, but there could be a lot of potential if you think about conversational interfaces in markets where maybe there's a big share of the population that doesn't know how to read and write. It could have a huge impact, but often these are actually the languages that are underserved. So there's definitely a problem when it comes to serving all languages at the same level. We'll probably get there. Hopefully we will. Sometimes, investing even just in very targeted analysis of the outcomes and then doing fine tuning, very targeted, can go a long way. But of course, you do have to have enough good data to begin with.
Anna, did you have any? Yeah.
Yeah, if I may, am I also curious what others would say about it. But if I need to fine tune my LLM because it's not dealing with a strong language, so to say, and I have very limited data to do it, I know that there has also been approaches to generate the training data and take another model that will generate this data for you. And here I think what Olivera said is also very important to remember, that you need to be sure that you that your model or your conversational AI agent is capable of dealing with all of these culture-specific words and vocabulary and all of this figurative expressions, metaphors, sayings, idioms, etc. So it's not only being trained or on some very general, neutral language, some very average register, because it also very much depends on your use case. Who will be your target audience? Are they going to be young people? Their language always differs a bit from the language that is been set in the books and in the language learning materials, because youngsters are always a little bit ahead. Their language is already evolving and changing more than the language of the elderly people, for example. So is your agent trained enough? Is it ready to face such conversations and hear this new slang and so on? So it's a very important part of the process that some people tend to oversee if they, again, don't understand the wide scope of this task, localization.
Yeah, I think there was actually a question kind of on this topic, on the demographics topic at least. So about how important are different demographics, different generation? Does that depend on the product, or do you always want to appeal to a broad audience? For example, youth language in French, former language in Asia.
Well, often these are questions that are driven by the budget, unfortunately, but that's how it is. Whenever you can, if you can target a very specific audience, then of course your results are better. You know, you're more engaging. You're engaging with that demographic that you're really trying to target. But often that's not really possible. And I would say is the same with, you know, locales, where, you know, there's a slight difference between the main language and the local or the dialect, but most companies would just go for a standardized version. So in localization, for example, we have some fictional languages like, you know, international Spanish that it doesn't really exist. Is a Spanish that, you know, most countries from Spain to all the different Latin countries can understand, but is it really engaging? No, it's not. Is it a great language experience? Absolutely not. But it allows companies to go to market, cover a big share of the population in a very cost effective way. And you can really make arguments both ways, because, you know, trying to reach as many users as you possibly can is also an important goal for business, but is also important for the users. So, you know, you always have to strike a balance between the two.
Yeah, I fully agree with Valeria that the business case is the key of the whole implementation of the conversational AI, usually at the companies, and they are definitely trying to hit 80, 85, 90% of their customer base, and even then, not all of them will be serviced. So always is the question how far you want to go. The more budget is, the further you can go. Although, but it also doesn't mean that you cannot serve those customers with quality, because you can detect this maybe at the very beginning of the call, or at the very beginning of the conversation, and it's better for you to, for example, redirect this person to the human channel, so this person is then taken care with value. So you're not losing your customer experience, but on the other hand, you're not spending another tons of money in order to localize your product for I don't know, 5% of the population. So it's one of the trade-offs which conversational AI needs to deal with. And I always say it's similar like when you're building the mobile app, and when you're building with the website. It will never be super 100% for everyone. Yeah, there will be some trade-offs. There will be missing some languages, and that's the current situation, and that's the way how at least in the business B2B world it usually works.
Yeah, what I add to that, great point. And I was also of this mindset of the 80-20 rule. I think most of us are familiar to try to target 80% of the users, until someone said recently, if your user base is 1 million people, that 5% becomes suddenly really big and becomes very important to also, like, you know, address them, because that's going to be, you know, a big audience that's not necessarily happy about their experience. So I think it just depends on the scale of your audience too.
Exactly. Definitely. Scaling in India is definitely then different than in Czech Republic, for example.
Yeah, but if you think about, I mean, there's over 7,000 active languages in the world. And, you know, if you just localize your products in about 10 languages, you can cover about 50% of the world. So, you know, and after that is a matter of, you know, scaling bit by bit. But you can really be very strategic when you localize, depending on the type of product, depending on, you know, where your users are, where you want to go next. So you can go a long way, even just with, you know, a limited number of languages.
I really like that point, Valeria, about strategizing. I think that's a really important conversation to be had at the start of a project, is how can we, you know, get the most value and make the most impact with our localization strategy within the budget and the scale and audience and so on. For example, if it's like a financial company or like a medical use case, we want to make sure that we get those medical terms or diagnoses right, because maybe they're slightly different. I'm going to use an unrelated example, like bonjour in French from France. It starts at the beginning of a conversation. It ends at the end in Québécois. And so, like, it just imagine something same but different in medical terms, where it's maybe the same word, but it has a completely different meaning depending on the context or when in the conversation it's said. It could be detrimental to that experience and even maybe the health of that patient.
So I was wondering actually about how you test that, and what your approach to testing multilingual experiences is, and do you have like specific testing criteria for each specific language? Do you have like a broad set? Yeah, just curious.
I already mentioned the topic, so maybe I'll go first on that one. So testing, and I think also Anna mentioned that it's very important part of the project, and the more you're in the project and the more stress you get and the less time you have, then usually the testing is the part which you're cutting. So that's the fall trap where you can get, but in general. As I mentioned already, for us it's important to really, especially when you're using user acceptance testing and when you're really in a final touch. Of course, I fully agree with Valeria that localization, the sooner is involved in the process, the better. But once we are with the testing, have really the native people that understands the cultural. The culture of the country or culture of the region where you're rolling out your bots, it's almost a necessary part of the process. Yeah, if it doesn't happen, and I've seen the works where you really purely rely on the machine translation and it goes live, and the experience is so bad that unfortunately then those experiences are also bringing the bad example for the whole industry, because usually the people are saying it's bot. Yeah, everyone had a bad experience with the chatbot. Everyone here in this room and with the voice bot. Yeah, but then it's generalized. So all bots are wrong. Yeah, so it's a bit of similar experience. So of course it's a kind of like I would say even our duty as a conversational designers and to make sure that our bots are the best quality possible before we go live. So yeah, that's the testing, and the native speakers, native people is for me the must in the process.
If I can add to that, because Emily, you asked if this would be some one test for several target audiences or several versions of the product. So if I have a multilingual bot, multilingual agent, I will be creating tests for each of the audience, because perhaps I also have different flows, maybe definitely different variations, different steps in the flows. Or if we're talking pure LLM agents, my prompts will differ. Considerable parts of my prompts can differ across the audience's cultures and countries. So of course it makes sense for me to also prepare the tests differently, but maybe there will be a few things that I need to check across all of the audiences. For example, if I go into healthcare domain that Olivera started, okay, if I have the same product, the same drugs, and this assistant is giving some information about this drug to the user. So, okay, this is what I'm gonna test across all my versions of the product, but there would be maybe different consequences, different further steps that I planned that people in one target group will do or in the other, and also then going into more details of how I frame the responses, if I prepare the responses, because or how I wrote the prompt for the model, how I instructed the model to generate a response, then I will be checking specifically with each audience how it performs, because the prompts will be different for each audience.
Yeah,
having a quality framework always helps, and really thinking about what does quality look like for specific product and for that specific market. For example, you could have to have warnings for some markets, but not for other when it comes to medical products. So knowing all of that ahead of time and bringing in the people that have that kind of knowledge, it's really important for even just framing what quality looks like for that specific experience.
Adding on to that, I was wondering what you consider success to look like, because I feel like there's no definition of success here because everything's shifting so frequently. So how do you kind of measure, and how often do you kind of look back and change that definition?
Yeah, I would say like always checking transcripts and seeing what users are saying, where they're saying, are they dropping out of the experience, where they're dropping out of the experience before they're dropping off what they're saying, and understanding their pain points and doing some root cause analysis to understand if it's linguistics or otherwise, or a combination of both.
Mm-hmm. I mean, at least for us, we always try at the beginning of the project to agree the KPIs with the customer. It's absolutely must, because then how to measure? Yeah, how to measure if the bot is good? Yeah, and the KPIs consist of different elements. Usually, it's kind of how many fallbacks, how many processes were completed end to end, how many transfers you made as a part of the conversations, how many misunderstandings you had, and so on and so forth. So there are a couple of really very tangible and measurable KPIs that can be set at the very beginning of the project, and you can be very transparent about it. That yes, we are expecting that, I don't know, 50 or 60% of the process will be automated, and the rest we are fine that it goes, for example, to the agent, or isn't completed, and so on and so forth. And if you are reaching that part of the KPI, which is business measurable, you can then say with the customer, yes, we achieved our goal, and it's a successful project. So for us, the KPIs are key, even really contracted wise, because really arguing if the bot is good or not good, it's it's very difficult conversation.
Anything else?
I would add that, yeah, all of these metrics are really important. And I think that you should, of course, measuring engagement can look quite different. Often the linguistic part is kind of difficult to differentiate from the overall UI and exactly how to, but you can definitely look at losses and try to measure exactly what the problem is. But I would say don't forget the broader experience that you're presenting. Engagement is one aspect, but you should look at all the possible issues that could be in the broader UI, and not just the more narrow conversational aspect.
I really like that point, Valeria, about the broader experience. And it makes me think of when I started off as a part-time job. When I was in college, I was a bilingual customer service rep at CIBC, which is like a bank in Canada. And I was helping with the very first telephone banking. So I was in IVR, and I didn't know I was going to end up in this field this many years later. But the reason why I say that is it is that broader experience that you talk about when the customer goes from an AI agent to an actual human agent. That experience continues. And when I recall that experience back then, especially specifically to the Canadian audience, because it's bilingual, we have to, speak Fringlish or be able to switch back and forth. Sometimes we'll forget word in one language and then replace with another language. So it becomes this like language salad. How can a chatbot recognize that, or a voice bot possibly recognize a mixture of languages that you get into another level of complexity? But I really like that point about the broader experience, and we're not just looking within the silo of the chatbot or the voice bot. We're looking at broader, like how are agents speaking? What kind of summarization are they getting? For example, how good is the summarization of the conversation for the agents themselves? How quickly can they pull up answers to questions in other languages? So it's looking at all those different touch points internally as well.
If I can add to that, because I love this topic, and I love that we are talking about this extra layer, an important extra layer of conversational UX, that it's not only that our users complete their goal and they get what they wanted, but exactly how they get it. What was their experience of going through this conversation? So Emily asked about the success and how would you define it, and it's quite a hard topic for me, because again, me as a and I guess as for any conversation designer, we're thinking about the user experience, and for us, success is always something so like up high that the agent rarely reaches that, even though our stakeholders or the product managers are satisfied. We're always designers were still not satisfied, because we see all the failures and how it can be better and how they define success. Sometimes I have to try and maybe do some user interviews with a short focus groups of my target audience, because again, I can look at the quantitative metrics. They are not going to tell me much about the experience. I can look at the transcripts, and that's a very important part, very important task not to miss. But it again might show me how the human responded, but not exactly maybe how the human felt about the whole experience. And I can definitely see where the user stops the conversation, but I'm not entirely sure what went wrong. And especially when we deal with these linguistic nuances, if I localize somewhere where there are many dialects, and actually for any big language or for any human language, there are always some dialects that you might not expect. I live in Denmark, and it's less than 6 million inhabitants, but in different parts of Denmark, people speak a bit different Danish. And there can be cases where people from the north might not understand entirely what people from the far island in the far east are talking, and that's a small country geographically wise with the 6 million, less than 6 million inhabitants. And as such, I might want to have such a conversational experience that all of the, if I create an assistant for the bank that operates across the whole country, I don't want to leave some of my users off because I have not thought about their experience, and what Olivera mentioned before about this 80-20 rule. Yeah, I don't want to leave my 20 out there just because I want to. My budget only allows the standard. So as a designer, I always think about a wider range of the success criteria, and I try to do more of the user interviews to ask people directly throughout the experience and what they think about it, and all of these linguistic nuances then are even easier to talk about and just to get their impression about talking to this assistant. How do you think? How did it sound? What do you think about how it responds? And do you feel like it understood you, and so on, and go into more details?
To that point, I was wondering, I mean, focus groups are amazing, but if you have so many different languages that you need to test and review, like how would you scale that on the review side of things and making sure, like, if there's something in a language that you don't personally know, are you also looking to local people to review those conversations as well?
I would say you could also like reach out within the company you work at and see who knows those languages to begin with, and just try to leverage as much of the internal resources as you can, and then outside of that, using AI to do your research. I think that's a really good one. And then there's also usertesting.com that can be affordable if you do small groups. You could also ask friends and family, and just of course always like making sure that's within the company's like protocol and whatnot. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of resources out there. There's probably language groups and different forums where you can, if you really dig deeper, like where you can get some of those like nuggets about that language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Valeria.
Sometimes opening up to beta testing across the world can help communities create tapping communities that might be willing to give feedback and be somewhat involved. That is very cost effective. It can be a cost effective strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to also say that especially friends and family concepts, I think is very efficient and works very well. And ABC testing, that's also quite good part. Usually also it's very fruitful to cooperate with the customer on that part, because of course the customer is also very interested in to have the best possible quality. So for example, if your customer has even the ability to reach out directly by phone to the sample of the users that were using the bot for example, in the pilot phase or in the early stages, and give you that's really amazing if your customer can support you also in that way. Yeah.
Well, that's a great point about getting the customer involved, right, Zenon? It's just like they want to be there. Yes. And the more they can be engaged, the better off for the relationship too.
Exactly. I mean, if the customer is not interested in the quality, then it's very difficult relationship.
Absolutely.
Giulia, did you have any other questions?
I mean, I see there is a great question in the chat, but I feel like it might bring us a little over the hour. Is there anyone who needs to drop at the hour? If not, we can go ahead maybe and have this last question, and then we can end on this. I think we touched throughout the conversation on this point, but just to bring it home, what are the biggest or hardest challenges you're trying to overcome when trying to fully localize an LLM? I assume it is very hard to get an LLM to understand the different slangs, references, short forms of places, things, items in the same way a local would.
If I can start with that topic, we definitely, for the LLM, I mean, you can use, as Anna mentioned, fine-tuning. It's to usually have a large data sets in order to achieve that, and a lot of computing power, and it's a process which tends to be costly. Localization can be also quite achieved with, at least in our experience, using maybe I hope you can hear me, because it seems that my internet got a little bit wrong. But I mean, if you're using RAG or knowledge-based concept in order to add more context when you're to your prompt, it.
I think you're breaking up, Zenon.
Oh, sorry about that. So I'm not sure.
No worries, no
my
worries. I think we could
Yeah.
just make out what you were trying to say, so totally fine.
Yeah. Thank
Does
you.
anyone
Thank you.
else
Sorry about that.
No worries. Anyone else wants to pitch in?
I mean, I think it's a problem that even, you know, the really large companies that created, you know, the foundation model are struggling with. You know, the experience, as we mentioned before, is definitely not the same across languages and across the world. So the lack sometimes is, you know, the lack of good data for specific languages and locales, and again, is also a matter of you know, business investment, and actually wanting to invest that and wanting to reach all languages and all countries. So not easily solved, but you know, I would agree, good fine tuning strategy and using RAG can help.
And I would
Maybe,
say,
oh yeah, sorry.
oh, sorry, Anna, go ahead.
Okay, just adding quickly that maybe you could consider another approach, because if you're working with the language that is underrepresented, that has less training data, and you cannot trust an LLM to really cover all of the nuances, you can do hybrid. You can do a hybrid assistant. You can pre-code, hard code some of the flows. Like that's, for example, what we do at Rasa, that the platform allows you to build hybrids that gives you control over your assistant, and you really limit what LLM can do. Or there could also be a merge between LLM and NLU, natural language understanding tools, so that you just get more control over your LLM, and then you know that maybe it won't do, let's say, it won't do as much as you could imagine it to do, but it will perform the main business processes successfully in your for your target group, and you have more control over the language of the model and over the understanding, because it's easier to train it than on a specific conversations. But you'll still need some conversational data and the native speakers for sure. Sorry, back to Olivera.
Oh yes, Anna. So yeah, thinking back, my mom was she was a translator and a proofreader, and in her latest role, she was a medical proofreader, specifically for gynecological products, birth control. And so imagine when you pull out that pamphlet from your birth control, there's like, you know, 3-point type for like, I don't know, 10,000 words, something like that. And so that language is very specific, even within medical, is very specific to birth control. So if you zero in on a use case in industry, then your localization becomes much more focused and strategic, and you can be more successful and be more budget conscious that way.
Awesome. I see there's one more question in the chat, but I think we'll get to that offline. I'll just tag you and we can add comments. But I just yeah, I think we will wrap up here. But this was an amazing conversation. I learned so much. There's so much to unpack here, and I feel like we still didn't get to half the stuff I have questions about. But yeah, thank you all so much for being here. This was great. And yeah, stay tuned. We have a couple more panels coming up.
Thank you so
I
much.
have one next week
Yeah.
that I would definitely recommend, which is a follow-up to our European chatbot panel, What Makes a Good Conversation. So definitely stay tuned for that.
Thank you so much, Giulia and Emily. Great to meet you, Anna, Zenon, and Valeria. Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone. It was
Thank
great.
you,
See
everyone.
you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.